My name is Brad Johnson, senior reporter at the Texan, if you didn't know that already. I've only done a few of these things. This panel is called Growing Pains. The concept is we have over 300,000 people coming here a year. Lots of commercial activity coming. It brings a lot of prosperity to the state, but it comes with trade-offs and problems we have to address, and that is going to be a big theme this session. We'll talk water, we'll talk power grid, we'll talk housing, and that is the objective of this. And our panelists we have to discuss this issue, Senator Charles Perry, Republican from Lubbock. He is taking the lead on especially all things water. Representative Ellen Troxclair, Republican from R-Lakeway, right? From Central Texas, and then Senator Nathan Johnson, Democrat from Dallas. Thank you all for joining us. We'll kick it off with a broad question. What's the biggest area of concern in relation to this growth that the state of Texas is facing? Senator Perry? I think I know where you're going on this.
Well, I'd say you got energy, but what we don't talk about is water supply. And the state of Texas is about 25 years behind on water supply development. Our current plan will tell you that if you do a deep dive into the current water plan. So energy and water are almost inseparable. They each complement each other. You kind of have to have one to do the other. But if I had to prioritize an infrastructure, for centuries, people have moved to where there was water. When water left, they left. If I had to prioritize the things we have to have as humanity, we have to have air, we have to have water, and energy, like electricity, et cetera, is more of a quality of life issue at some level. We need to address water supply and development and infrastructure this session, before we leave. The good news is we have the supplies to develop, and two, we have the wealth to do that development. It's just a matter of a commitment to do it. So we'll get there, but I obviously, water chairman, believe water is, but I think there's common sense that backs up where we're at, that you got to have water or you don't have anything else. And we have places in this state that needed water yesterday. We have signs and evidence across the spectrum in all areas of the state that are having well depletions. We're beginning to have private equity and companies looking at Texas ask the question, will you have water for me and my factory if we come? And the answer today is maybe. When we leave in 25, it has to be an affirmative yes for what we're going to get to do to address the water challenges. I caution, we're going to triage a lot before we get there because everything in water takes 20 years plus. So we've kind of gotten behind the curve, but if you need water 20 years from now and you're not beginning in 25 to address it, you won't have it by 45. So that's where I'm at, but energy plays a role in that, and energy, we clearly understand, is another thing we've under capacity, probably for legitimate reasons. All the prosperity that Texas has grown, we haven't been able to. These people that come to Texas didn't bring their schools, their roads, their water, or their energy. They don't bring that with them. So we just need to recognize where we're at, which in a lot of levels where I'm sitting in a session, we still think as if we're a 10 million population state. It's just a mindset that you've got to get past that. We are way beyond that. So that's where I see this session going.
Representative Troxclair?
It's unfair that you let him go first because, you have to say absolutely hands down water, especially, statewide certainly, but my district is so unique and diverse because I have very suburban communities that are in western Travis County down to very rural communities in places like Comfort. And so, yes, you drive past Lake Travis and you see it visually, that it's not where it needs to be. And you have the wells going dry and it's a challenge to get people who have the water to, when they turn on the faucet, they have the water, what it's like to be a family in a rural community where a well goes dry and you no longer have the sustenance for that you need. So I absolutely think that this is the water session. We did a lot of good things last session. It was a step in the right direction, but this is something that we need to now take kind of a sledgehammer to, because we are so far behind, and like you said, we have the resources to do something about it. So I am very excited about the ideas that Senator Perry has proposed so far to make sure that the state is going to be able to catch up, and then keep up with the population that's here and that's going to be growing. And so that's one of my main focuses this session. And of course, transportation, the grid, housing, there's plenty more that comes with it, but none of that matters if you don't have water.
Senator Johnson.
Yes to all of that, and just picking it up and making it a little more broad. It doesn't come in the form of a bill, but I think we are at a point in Texas when we have to shift our mindset. Senator Perry, he was I think accurately describing that the state still thinks it's 10 million people. It's like the city of Austin. It's built for 150,000. There just happens to be 1 million people trying to navigate downtown streets. We do have to start looking at making long-term investments, and that means thinking about investing in water. If I asked each one of you to choose between $150 off of your property tax bill every year for the next 10 years or a water supply for the next 50 years, I think I know which one you would choose. We probably don't have to make that choice explicitly, but when you look at the next 50 years, when you look at just the next 25 years, our population is going to increase by 10 million people. We could have a grid that has to double in size within 5 years. We have healthcare that is lagging. We have an education system. I understand you had a little fun on the last session talking about vouchers or no vouchers, right? That's 2% of the student population. What about the other 98%? Actually lump them all together in 100%. We are going to have to invest in public education. If we were to fund public education or private schools alongside in parallel to public education at the same levels that we did indexed for inflation from 2019, that would be $15 billion more dollars. And we can all fret about it and say, oh no, I need $150 off my property taxes. But I think we have to ask ourselves, in 30 years, what will someone say thank you to Charles Perry and Ellen Troxclair and Nathan Johnson and all of you for? And it's going to be the investments that we make today. And those things shouldn't get bogged down in big ideological battles, because I think there's a lot, there's no one on this stage that thinks we should not be putting a bunch of money in water right now. I'm hopeful that the session will reflect the shift of mindset that Senator Perry and I have been talking about for years now.
I think if you build it, if you don't build it, they won't come, doesn't work. So I think you could summarize it in that way, right? And that mindset in a lot of places has not panned out well.
Senator Perry, upstairs you said it's just a matter of money. We just need the money to get it going. Is it really that simple?
In this particular issue, I made the comment precluding that this is one issue that doesn't have a broken family or a broken heart attached to it. It's one that truly a commitment or resource to develop undeveloped water resources and build out that infrastructure. That's all it takes is a commitment. Here's the philosophical policy shift that happened this session, or will happen. I moved the conversation for water supply and funding is a local issue only for the most part. I've moved that to it is a statewide infrastructure conversation, no different than roads and bridges. We must have a coordinated approach to developing an undeveloped water supply and moving it to where it needs to be. I clarify, undeveloped means you're not moving it from one section of the state to another and calling that new supply. That did not add to any volume of water available for Texans. We need 10 to 12 million acre feet of new water supply on top of the 13, 14 million acre feet we use today by 2050 at the latest. Everything in water is 20 years. We got to get started. The 10 to 12 million acre feet comes from marine desal where it makes sense. The water plant has about 3 new of those plants built into it. Brackish aquifers of about 5.2 billion acre feet to develop. For conversation, 1 acre foot supports about 9 Texans annual use. Brackish aquifers of 5.2 billion to develop. And then in the oil and gas industry, it's a twofer. Produced water, we get 25 million barrels of water per day out of the Permian Basin with oil production. It's nasty water. We are our third session into a pilot project to learn how to clean that up and make it beneficial use. And the fourth option is to bring in water from contiguous states. The old joke of Mississippi can send us water, it ain't going to be the Mississippi, but we have legitimate opportunities going forward of acquiring water. So we have 4 new sources of development that's truly adding to the overall volume available. It's just money. What we also did by moving it from local to statewide is we've taken it out of the hands of the local, and here's the reason. No local jurisdiction can afford these projects. They're too expensive and they're too lengthy, and it's created a patchwork of really depleting resources being developed, not before what the community needed, but how much the community was willing to pay for. It's not a good way to go water. So as we go through this, we don't have a pay it forward society. Property tax relief comes to mind. What are you going to help for me today? Because I don't really care 20 years from now. I won't be here. That's a mentality that our locals face. There's not a single mayor in this state that can come to you and say, give me $30 more a month. I will develop water supplies for your kids and grandkids so that they can live in this community. Nobody's going to buy that anymore. So we can't rely on the locals to do this anymore. Now, the state will recover that cost when water delivery occurs. The grid that I've developed is pretty simple. We have a nationwide water problem. I'm hoping to get national conversations started. At the end of the day, the grid that I've worked on is actually more complicated than what a national grid would. But we have to begin as a state to think, they're not going to do it. We'll do it. They'll pay us back. We have the leverage to do it. We can save taxpayers' dollars. The 150 property tax that you got last year, great. You ain't going to see it this year, or 1,300 on average, I'm told. But what we might do is save you from paying $50 a month for water and sewer supply. So how we save consumers money is all relative. I'd rather get something for it, that the state needs to be the state of Texas that it is today going forward. We have pushed the water conversation too far. In that nuclear energy, small modular reactors, it all has kind of come together in a perfect storm. So there's a lot of things that's tied to that where we're going to see benefit from. Nathan and I have had those conversations. In my district, we're getting one of those by 30. And it's going to be deployed in the Permian Basin, I hope, on produced water desal plant. So it's really, the stars are aligned. Texas is positioned better than any state to capitalize on our wealth, but the technologies and the things that we're asking to do. But we have to commit to doing it, and we have to think larger than me and what did the legislature do for me. We have $51 billion accumulated in property tax relief. In the current budget, there will be $32 billion plus in property tax commitment buy-downs that we made since 19. That's a large chunk of obligation that you guys don't feel after 2 years. I would argue, as Nathan has said, it might be better to rethink and actually go to infrastructure so that we can keep having properties that go up in value and Texas survive but thrive.
Senator Johnson, one of the big water fights going on in the state, and it's been going for decades, is the Marvin Nichols Reservoir. And that's a project to build a reservoir out in northeast Texas and ship the water over to Dallas, Fort Worth for their use. It's a question of competing rights, right? Property rights versus the right to one of the most basic sources of life. Do you see that divide being bridged at all? How do you fix that? How do you make it so that we can actually build something like this, if that is the route chosen?
I don't think that that's going to get solved legislatively this session because it hasn't been festering for long enough. But if I can solve that and bring a water expert like Charles Perry into the room to get that done, I certainly would like to facilitate that. But it does highlight something that we're facing as we grow and mature as a state. You have fundamental principles, property rights, contractual rights, rights of eminent domain that are going to step on each other all over the place. So something that specific, I'd be hesitant to get into a policy proposal up here today, but stay tuned.
I would add to that, Marvin Nichols is part of our state water planning. It produces 279,000 acre feet for that region to use. If the legislature votes on my plan and we're successful in the things included in that plan, we will give an alternative to Marvin Nichols Reservoir that will produce 300,000 plus acre feet for that regional use and will not have the property rights conversations. Now, I'm not
And there we go.
I'm not saying you should drop Marvin Nichols or not drop Marvin Nichols. And as I've questioned as I travel the state and the country and globally the last few years on water, don't quit doing what you're doing until the voters have spoken in November. Nothing's changed. But that said, Marvin Nichols is a great example of why we're behind. Our state water plant had 4 reservoirs to come online. We have 22 to develop. 4 of those were supposed to deliver water to Texans in 2020. They have not started their federal or state permitting or eminent domain conversations, and it takes a minimum of 30 years to bring a reservoir online when you start. So that's just a good example where we thought we were going to get 4 million acre feet of water from reservoirs, and 4 of the reservoirs that were delivering water in 20 haven't even began. That's what I say. Our own plan tells the story. It doesn't have to be creative. So Marvin Nichols, and I was in trouble because I was on Dallas Politics or something, and I made the comment.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
You are. I made a comment. Probably shouldn't have done it in hindsight, but it was the truth. Marvin Nichols is in eminent domain purgatory. But that is a very much a clear sign of things to come when we go to trying to take property rights to move water supply into the conversation. So I told those folks forever. We've been having these conversations for years. Don't quit doing what you're doing. But there's a legitimate opportunity possibly coming down the way that they don't need the water today. We've got a little time. So we may be able to mitigate the Marvin Nichols of the state. There's several of those like that.
Yeah. Representative Troxclair, I remember when you first ran for office, you talked about this water issue in Central Texas. What are the needs that are specific to this part of the state on water? You drive anywhere around here and you can see it with your own eyes. I think that we have come to a crisis point when you realize there was a time where the conflict around Lake Travis, for example, was, you just want a bunch of water for recreational use. It's just a bunch of people out there who want a lake to get out on their boats. And now people are starting to realize that we are depending on that lake for our drinking water when you turn on the tap. And so it's changed the dynamic, and I really think we have gotten to a crisis point of that realization. But you drive even further west and you go over the Pedernales, and that's continued to be dry for a long time. You go to the Highland Lakes and you see that a lot of that water is being sent, down to South Texas for their agriculture needs down there. And a lot of fights going on about, the right direction for LCRA and how we manage the decisions about who gets what water. And I just think it's coming to an absolute boiling point. And so I am a low tax, I am all for everything we can do to reduce our property taxes and to make it more affordable to live in our state. At the same time, we have to recognize that it's kind of now or never at this point. And so, and then as you go further west, like I said, so many people are depending on their wells that have gone dry. I've experienced that myself personally. So there is, I think, a united. One thing that's interesting is it's like Republican or Democrat, right? Like of all the partisan issues that we deal with, I feel like water is the one thing that we can all sit on this stage and say, yeah, we're gonna. We like water. We all recognize that we are depending on it. And of all the things that go on at the state capitol, this is one where it's not a partisan issue or a divisive issue. It's just what is the quickest, most effective, smartest way to get this done. And honestly, Senator Perry has done a wonderful job in being a leader on that issue. And I hope once the House gets itself settled and we have committees and all that, we'll have a little bit more clarity of what that process looks like in the House. But, I'm a founding member of the Water Caucus, and I've plan on filing a slew of water bills myself, including one of the things that my district is dealing with is that we are near the high growth areas, right? So Lago Vista, for example, a small town,
but right outside of Austin city limits. And so one of the bills that I'm filing is to make sure that the Water Development Board gives extra consideration for small communities that do not have the tax base to invest in large infrastructure projects. That if they're within 50 miles of a high growth area, that they get extra consideration for state grant funds, because we have to change the paradigm of being forward thinking and being proactive. And again, we're in a situation where we still have a lot of catch up to do, but we should also be thinking, what are we doing for the communities like Lago Vista who know, they see it, they see the growth, it's like they see it coming right at them. And yet the local leaders don't feel like they have the tools that they need to really provide for the coming growth. So I want to be an advocate for being more proactive on a community-based level.
There you have it. If there's one takeaway for this panel, it's water is a problem. Senator Johnson, let's shift gears to the power grid. You and I spoke on a panel like this 2 years ago, and that was before all the ERCOT market reforms, after all the physical reforms. What did you think, and what do you think of how they have since been implemented, the market reforms, the tweaks to ERCOT that were adopted last session?
I think a lot of great work has been done. And by the way, being here 2 years ago was so much fun. I came back.
The conversations we've had.
You bet. The projected growth on the grid has rendered what we've done so far with market reforms and other things much more important, but it is in some ways irrelevant. We've been trying to fix the problems that we all experienced during Uri, when everything froze and people died and we lost hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think we've done actually a pretty solid job on protecting ourselves against the catastrophic damages. But what's much more difficult to do is how do you fix a market? We all believe in free markets, but we do structure them. How do you create the right incentives to bring on the power that you need for the cost that you need it at the time that you need it, right? And we've worked very hard with that, and I've never seen so many people with so much expertise disagree so intensely with each other than in this issue. And somehow through all of that, you trust a bunch of legislators who aren't really experts in anything except occasionally accounting, who then try to become experts in certain areas. And we certainly have Senator Perry as a leader in water. I've spent a lot of time in electricity, but we're still relying on our own judgment about competing expert views. Given all of that, I think we've done a pretty good job at setting up this market. We are seeing new generation come online. But almost more important than anything we've done in government reforms is the changes in the coming load growth that will implicate water, that will implicate transportation and education and housing, because we're looking at hundreds of thousands of jobs and possibly doubling the total electrical demand on our grid in the next 5 years. Now that is a sci-fi scenario. No one can really come close to it. But we do have to start planning immediately this session. I think the issue this session, as far as the grid is concerned, is not market reforms. We've been tweaking it enough. We need to let it work. Any more tweaking on that, and we're probably going to cause damage. Let's let some things play out. But we're going to need transmission. We're going to need to manage the new generation. We're going to need to make sure that if there's load growth next to a community, that it's not so loud that it's driving you out of your homes, that it's not creating so much additional demand on the electrical grid that your costs are going to go through the roof, and that you're not taking your taxes and subsidizing the profits of a company that comes in to set up an AI data center or to electrify the Permian Basin. So it continues to be a highly dynamic, highly exciting area where, again, Texas probably has the best position on earth to lead the way in new generation of electricity and the technological progress that comes along with the coming age of AI, as well as regulating the downsides of AI. News as of yesterday, a new Chinese AI platform called DeepSeek showed up and announced some results. And it shook the world up, and you saw a stock drop in NVIDIA chips. And as we sit here and plan to build out a grid for 50, 60 gigawatts of new electrical demand due to AI data centers and announcements of a $500 billion Stargate plan, this little startup company shows up and says, we're using 1/8 of the chips and 1/8 of the power. Think how hard our job is. Feel sorry for us, please, because we're trying to design for the future, but the future's changing so quick.
I don't think that's a winning message.
And that's, probably not. And that's where, frankly, I hate to use the word, but I'm kind of conservative in our approach to these things. Because once you commit down a path, if the world changes under your feet, then what do? So I take our jobs very seriously, and we consult with people and try to work together to put us in the best position to avail of the opportunities we have without going so far down a wrong turn that we've now misspent our resources.
Representative Troxclair, any thoughts on the ERCOT market reforms or anything else?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that 40% of our grid is currently not dispatchable energy. It's renewable energy, it's wind, it's solar, and the sun doesn't always shine and the wind isn't always blowing, especially in the critical times. So while we have made incredible increases in the amount of megawatts that we have, I mean, if we had the energy that we had now back when Uri happened, we would have been able to cover it, but the people who are coming to Texas, I think you mentioned data centers, Bitcoin. I mean, all these things, in addition to just the number of people moving here every day. I think
manufacturing onshoring, and the electrification of the oil and gas industry, all major drivers of load growth.
So we have to get to a place where we have dispatchable, reliable, on-demand energy that when we need it most, that is there. And I think that the market distortion, that subsidies, federal subsidies, had a lot to do with the initial market distortion, that we didn't have investments in nuclear and other reliable forms of energy in the times that in the previous 5 years before Uri, and we dealt with the consequences of that, right? So I'm interested to see what happens at the federal level now under a new Trump administration, and that hopefully is pro oil and gas. And we have a lot of good American energy that's going to provide for the people of Texas, and we just have to make sure that we are not creating a market where we are continually incentivizing energy that may not be there when we need it most. And I see. Now we got some sparks. I know. Well, go ahead. I mean, I want to talk about battery storage quickly, but after I hear.
I actually think there's going to be a whole lot of areas where Ellen and I completely agree. What I think it's important we're honest with ourselves, that all this cheap renewable energy really was cheap, and it did distort the markets, and it was the federal government. It was the federal government under George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. They've been pumping money into renewable energy for decades, and Texas enjoyed it in the form of low prices, and all of us especially industry, was addicted to the low price of renewable electricity and disregarded the fact that it's not there when the sun's not shining and the wind isn't blowing, and we could have at any time, particularly since 2011 when we had a big freeze, create a market which paid more for a dispatchable electron, usually gas-fired, than for a less reliable electron. We could have done that. That's not a Democrat thing, Republican thing. We enjoyed the cheap electricity, and then we did pay the price. I totally agree. We need reliable, dispatchable generation, but we also need all of that renewable energy, because this coming load growth cannot possibly be met with gas-fired generation. There's not enough parts on planet Earth or enough workers to install this stuff. So I think, Ellen, you want to talk about batteries, and I think it's a great idea to talk about batteries, because go ahead. Because it's kind of a bridge between our two messages, really.
Well, I mean, because sometimes you say, well, now we're going to have battery storage, and that's going to solve the problem, because then you can store the energy from the wind generation and dispatch it when you have. Well, in reality, the amount of energy that those battery facilities can store is absolutely minuscule, and it is not possible to build enough of that stuff, even if we wanted to really fill the gap that we have. And again, in talking about kind of growing pains and rural versus urban divides, people should know that these battery storage facilities that are often owned by, foreign foreign companies are coming in to rural communities in Texas without the public safety infrastructure to respond to an emergency. So you have tiny little towns that now have, 1, 2, 3, multiple battery storage facilities going in. They have a volunteer fire department that is not equipped to respond to, if the thing goes up in smoke, which does happen, recently happened in California just a few days ago. On a dead end road where residents will be trapped if there is an emergency, there's no egress. And so another bill that I have filed and have gotten some pushback from the green, energy side of things is a bill to just make sure that those things are going in the right. I mean, we can talk about subsidies and we can talk about, but at the very least, we have a responsibility as policymakers to make sure that communities and residents have basic public safety protections. And so the bill simply says it's a new permit through the PUC, and it allows them to take in consideration location requirements. And so I've gotten lots of media calls. Oh, you're anti-grid. You are going against. I even had one say, well, you're going directly against the governor. And I was like, oh, I am. I didn't know. Because he wants to beef up the grid, and it's like, well, there's a lot of ways to beef up the grid, and let me tell you that battery storage is probably not going to do it for us. So that is one of my absolute priorities this session, because I have several communities in rural Texas that I have been absolutely blindsided, and we don't really have tools at the state level to help us navigate where the right places are for a broad range of energy supply of generation, but specifically battery storage has become a bigger and bigger issue.
Senator Perry, the thing that hasn't really been discussed as much yet are nukes. It seems like the industry believes this is a game changer. Is it really, though?
Well, unfortunately, we've become integrated into the nuclear conversation. What I've discovered is they're not snake oil salesmen, but there are a lot of misinformation out there. And if you don't ask the right questions, you get their answer, which is not the right answer. So specifically, if I were to tell you there's only one technology in one company that will deliver a small modular reactor, which is the new platform for nuclear energy, before 2030, possibly, there's only one in the state of Texas, there's one in Tennessee, maybe, and that's it. There's technologies out there that are walk-away safe now. They don't have the big domes because they don't have the fear of pressurized nuclear lines pushing radioactivity into the atmosphere that travels the Earth 50 times when it gets loose. There are some of those companies pushing that technology, branded to look a little different and sound better, but it's still light water pressure reactor lines, and that's not where we need to move to. But they have garnered the attention because they're mega companies. They're big footprints. They have a history of doing some of these in the past. The new stuff, the walk-away safe stuff, the molten salt reactors, there's some other technologies that are out there that are not near as possibly damaging to the earth and people that surround it because they have no pressure in the line. So that's the first question you ask a company. Are you pressurized water? Are you a light water reactor with pressurized lines? Because you're getting the same technology that had the issues of the past that people ran from nuclears for decades. So the one company that I'm familiar with is in my district. Abilene Christian University, of all places, has a bay. They are constructing an SMR modular, a small modular reactor, today. It should be ready for deployment commercially by 30. The state has not put any money into that project because it's a private university. That being said, they have partnered with A&M, Texas Tech, UT, and Georgia to get to this point. They are way past an idea. They have gotten a construction permit from the feds. They need, I think rightfully so, $125 million to get the demonstration reactor completed. The investor capital to this point is still out there, but it's not near as lucrative because people are beginning to go, we're into this pretty deep. So at what point in the session are we going to have the conversation, at what point does the state stand a little risk to potentially be a game changer and own the nuclear energy field of this country? Somebody's going to own nuclear. Texas is positioned best to do it. That particular reactor demonstration's completed in 18 months. They start running it, monitoring it, and the commercial reactor is being built parallel to it. They have to name the deployment of that SMR modular in 25, where they're going to put it. Federal requires a deployment site so that they can vet it. I'm asking for it to go into the Permian Basin to go on a produced water desal system. 5 megawatts of the 100 megawatt production would be for desal. 95 megawatts would be for industry consumption. As Senator Johnson said, the industry, the oil and gas industry has said we need gigawatts of power to develop the fields that we're sitting on over the next 50 years. We can't get there. The future of energy is customer-centric. What I mean by that, an AI center is going to have its own power source. The oil and gas industry will have their own power sources. The chip manufacturers will put one of these SMRs on their side or have a gas generation on their side. So the grid's not going to build out in a way that all these new industries and ideas coming to Texas are going to plug into it. On the contrary, they're probably going to do their own thing because they're private sector. They're into making money, and the quicker they can get up and running, the better they are, and they need a reliable source. And actually, it benefits Texas because actually they'll become a generator, possibly. But they also insulate the grid from cybersecurity issues in the sense that that's just one more animal on the grid that we don't have to worry about being hacked. It'll be a private, isolated event. So lots of things, but I caution nuclear. I had this conversation with Lieutenant Governor. If someone comes to you and says, you need to help me with nuclear, you need to ask them the first question, when are you going to be commercially deployable? And if they're honest, they're going to say 15 to 20 years. Some may say 10 to 12 and get there, but you got to kind of carve down nuclear to where the real players today are. And then you can get involved, and I think Texas needs to think about risk sharing at this stage, not before they've got their federal permit, not before they've got the facility to build it in. That's where these guys are. They're building the facility, but they need a little money to get over the demonstration. And then the commercial will come because they will have purchase power contracts to go to the bank to build out that reactor. 100 megawatts of power. It's a modular. It fits on the back of a semi. 250 megawatts of thermal. What does that mean? Thermal is where you desal. You will become distilling water, which takes a lot of the membrane stuff out of the equation. That's where your challenge is with membranes with 125,000 parts per solid trying to go through it. We have to develop the produced water in the oil and gas because that is the issue that's causing earthquakes in the injection side. The industry needs us to solve that problem. It just happens to produce 500,000 potential acre feet of water supply for that area. So it's a twofer.
What's really cool is some of this stuff's coming together, and in some ways the problems are solving themselves. When Senator Perry's talking about these data centers and other people putting their own power on site, it can actually bridge some of that problem with the intermittent power sources of solar, wind, and possibly other intermittent sources, because what you have is this site that's drawing a gigawatt of power off of all this renewable fleet. And the sun goes down, they flip on their gas-fired generation, run that for a little while, or if during the day there's cloud cover, they can spark up their engines and supplement the grid. So we actually see load growth stabilizing the grid if we manage it well. As far as the concerns that Ellen was expressing about the batteries, I totally agree. I think we need to take the same attitude towards battery deployments, AI data centers, pipelines, petrochemical refining plants. I mean, all these things blow up, catch on fire, create eyesores, smells. I do think we ought to impose the same standards on any kind of renewable fleet or any kind of new technology that we do on the old technology. But we should indeed recognize that people live here. We're not just creating power. We're creating power so that we can turn on lights and live here. And if it's making our lives miserable, we do need a regulatory and legislative approach to those things.
I'm looking for a Senate sponsor.
See me after the class.
Last topic I want to touch on, you just mentioned it, housing, people coming to live here. I mean, that's the most basic aspect of this, right? I just saw a headline from, I think, the Statesman the other day that apartment rates are actually dropping for the first time in a long time. Imagine hearing that a couple of years ago in Austin. Senator Johnson, what do you think about that? How, is that something that we just wait on supply and demand to get matched up?
No. I've been talking with developers for a long time, and what they'll tell you is that markets will not produce the housing that we're lacking here in Texas. At the high end, you can make a ton of money off of selling expensive housing, so there's no real problem with the market producing that. At the low end, we have cooperation between local governments and the federal government putting subsidies in there, and we can talk about those two things if you want to, but what's clearly missing is the middle market. Right? Everybody's afraid to do anything for the middle market because we think it should solve itself, but it really doesn't. And I've talked to major developers around the state, and they're like, yeah, we're not building that. And the reason is it's expensive to get what's called mezzanine financing. We are talking about the people who come work at all this new industrial production that's coming to Texas for onshoring or electrification of the oil and gas or the burgeoning tech industry, the people who are moving here. Great, we're going to take advantage of all the advantages of Texas, but they got nowhere to go. And these are people at average income. They can't afford to rent anything or buy anything. So what they're doing is scooping up cheap places that should be cheap, driving the rents up, which means the people who can't afford more, can't afford that. They're homeless or live in 3 families into an apartment, and there's still not enough for middle income. So the market will not solve that problem because the profit margins just aren't there. And the reason is something called mezzanine financing. If you have a project that costs $100, a bank will lend you $60, and if the project goes bust, they sell the place, they foreclose, and they get their $60 back. Cool. What about the other $40? Equity piece comes in, they're willing to risk about $10 of their own money, the rest they want to finance. That middle tier of money is what's so expensive to get. I'll go really fast here. I see a sign up there. That can be like 17%. The state could take the same approach to housing that it took to dispatchable gas-fired energy generation last session, where we created a big multi-billion-dollar fund, provided a low interest rate for that mid-tier financing that makes building more attractive. So you get the private market coming in, building housing simply with a financing mechanism, and we as taxpayers actually get a higher rate of return than we are with that money sitting in our bank accounts. I think that could pull several 100,000 new housing units online, bring rent prices down for the lower income levels, and provide places to live for all those new jobs that we're creating here. Oh, and I have a bill for that. Be filing it tomorrow.
You might have a sponsor too. No?
I'm looking for a house sponsor.
Representative Troxclair.
I don't know about that one, but we'll talk. We'll talk more after.
Anything on housing? Real quick, but yeah.
I would just say it's not just housing for housing's sake. Again, in the place that produces our food, rural Texas, we have ranches that are being sold to developers and broken up into tiny little plats that are, outside city limits. And while zoning authority for county commissioners, may not be a palatable solution, like we do have to make sure that development is done, because you can't put 1,000 homes in, again, a rural community with no infrastructure, limited water. So we passed a bill last session that hopefully will in practice require developers to prove that they have sustainable water supply for 50 years and go through the county and have that approved and proven before they get their subdivision approved. But like we have to look for other tools in the toolbox just to make sure. To make sure that as we are growing, we are doing so at a pace that we can keep up with, because all these problems that we just talked about are not going to get solved if we just go out and put a bunch of high density housing in rural communities that don't have the infrastructure to support it. So finding that balance, working with county commissioners in particular to make sure that they feel like they have the tools that they need to follow up on water in particular. So yep, that's what I would say is let's make sure that we don't do it in a collaborative way. Yep.
Your answer there made me want to bring up municipal utility districts, but we're not going to open that can of worms. That's Growing Pains. Thank you all to our panelists. We really appreciate you coming, and we hope you enjoyed it.